Hi to everyone. Now I'll try and give you a path through my projects. My intention is to try and tell you something about myself for you as students, tell you something more about my path rather than my results. I think you're more interested in how I got there. I chose to speak Italian. If you have questions in English, there's no problem, but I find it, I'm more fluent in Italian. This conference is called Driven by Curiosity in the sense that curiosity has been my real illness, we could say, a condition that I've had since a kid and has been very strong. And I really hope that you have a bit of this illness as well, or that maybe today I can give you some of my sesh of my illness. I think this is the main element for any creative person is curiosity. I always begin my conferences with this object that you see behind me, which was possibly my first project. I was 9 years old. This was a British engine machine that my father had in his study, and I admired it so much because there was water in it and you put some alcohol. Sorry, can you not chat in the back rows? It's hard to speak otherwise. Please ask this. You put some alcohol in the water and it started to kind of move around and action the engine. As I broke all my toys, because every toy they gave me, I broke it because I was interested in building something new. So there were lots of objects in the home that were prohibited. I couldn't touch them at all. This was one of them. So after a long time that I tried to look at it and insisted, and he gave me my first brief, and he said, okay, you can do whatever you like, you can use it as it is, as long as you don't break it and dismantle it, but use it, give it back as I made it. What I did was I took a piece of car race that I had as a toy. I dismantled all this toy race car. I put the water and alcohol in these various pistons and things of the car, and this car started moving. At that moment, I realized that I wanted to dedicate my whole life to doing this kind of projects, these making things. I understood that if you really made an effort and dedicated time with some trials and errors, you could really make what you can imagine, you had imagined in your mind. This curiosity, this kind of illness I had, has really conditioned my whole life, I must say. I was born in the north of Argentina. The first thing is that it made me go to Córdoba, where I made my industrial design studies. There I did my degree. Straight afterwards, I decided to move to Milan to do a master in what was then the Domus Academy. Milan, for me, was a city which was fantastic. It received me and was incredibly generous towards me and gave me so many opportunities. Right from the beginning, I was really lucky. I managed to work with Paolo Rizzatto and Alberto Meda. There were two people who had their independent studios, incredibly famous people, but they worked by themselves. So I was a young student, a young graduate that worked with these people who spoke my same project language, my same design language. It was so fun to listen to them and try and contribute a little to these huge minds. After a while, I opened my own studio. And right from the beginning, I have some very clear, basic concepts that have been driving my designer's work. So it may seem chaotic, but I'm going to try and just take you through these concepts that drive me, and to show you this also through my projects, which I think is more interesting. For me, putting lipstick on a gorilla is certainly not design. This is a very famous Dieter Rams sentence. Many people think that this is what design is about, that it's something from the outside towards the object. Instead, for me, it comes from the inside and goes outside. It's an idea that is able to convey its beauty gradually from inside to out. So it's very hard to transform a bad idea into something beautiful, almost impossible actually. Instead, if you have a good idea and you work on it, probably you can find something beautiful to match it. Design is an holistic project, holistic discipline. This means that it is very complex and you need much knowledge in many different areas. So here I really encourage you to not spare time and dedicate time also to learning the most weird things, because anything that attracts your curiosity and that can attract you or stimulate you, one day could become exactly the element that you need to manage to turn a project into something interesting. So in my life, I very often dedicated a long period of time to subjects that weren't necessarily useful in that particular moment, but that then, afterwards, were useful for the project. So dedicated time to read philosophy, to a very new technique of plastic injection molding printing. These are not things that are so... È peggiorato per me, troppo forte. They're things that are apparently far, but instead they're very useful in the project. So in this, I really use my curiosity very strongly. My curiosity is like a compass that tries to guide me in the world of design. If something attracts your curiosity, this is already a creative act. And you should dedicate time to try and understand why it is being curious and try to understand this element and apply it to your objects. Design is an heuristic process, which means that you must also allow yourself to make mistakes. You can make mistakes. I don't believe in designers with a genius idea, which they just take a pencil and design it, and the first second after a brief they have the project. Yes, of course, you follow your first idea, you experiment, you try to go on with it, and immediately when you have an idea, you've got to try making prototypes and see if they work. Every new project I do has hundreds of prototypes before I find the right solution. I'm not afraid of making mistakes. This is something that I apply to my studio, even to my clients. I carry on my ideas and I'm allowed to make mistakes to then reach the final idea that satisfies me. Now I'm going to guide you through a path, through certain projects that is probably not even exactly in chronological order, but to tell you a bit as students. First of all, these concepts that I've already told you, and you'll see how they can be found in my project, so something which is conceptual and philosophical and not a formal part of the project. And then also to show you a path that the opportunities don't arrive on the first day. The most fantastic company in the world is not to come to you tomorrow and say, oh, I have this budget, please make something. You've got to really conquer this, and every opportunity and door that opens, you must try and offer your design vision. And this is what happened some time ago with a company, a very famous company. Danese is a company which is a part of the history of design. Murari and Somari, lots of great designers have worked. And they had done some very interesting design stories. But it's quite a small company actually. It doesn't have huge production numbers. They're not able to make a lot of investments on molds and stuff. So my opportunity was to try and make a project that tells an interesting story with not such a high investment. This may seem obvious right now, but in 2005 when I carried out this project, presented in 2005, but actually it started in 2003, I had thought of trying to use some digital molding computer techniques and the same logics that you were used in automotive industry to create a structure. I had this idea that maybe if I searched around metal sheets, I could make, and folding them and molding them, I could make an interesting, very, very light table. So I really tried to study this a lot. I made lots of exercises and tryouts. Of course, the minimal, sometimes ideas are minimal like this. It's not always a revolutionary idea. You start with what you have, but it's a little step forward. Basically, the idea was to structure this metal sheet by folding it in this way and then fixing it like this. So as I was saying, folding the metal sheet in this way, I could make a very highly resistant structure even when 1 millimeter sheet of metal. And then I also thought of making the legs dismantleable so that you could transport it quickly, easily, let's say. So then to connect the leg to the structure, it's something that took away weeks and months of trial and error to do this. But in the end, it's a very simple mechanism with these two screws. The leg fixes into the basic structure, it gets blocked, and this is the final result. So in the end, it's a very simple project. It's the first opportunity. Nobody says, okay, you can use any budget you like. Show me what you can do. That was the technology of the moment. Laser cut metal was the thing of the moment, and I tried to make a little story with this. So this table, which appears very, very light and thin, these legs that kind of fixed into the tabletop, it's actually a highly resistant table, but it doesn't look like something made with such a poor material like metal sheet. In any design project, you're seeing a reasoning, but there's always also formal research, certainly, and research for beauty. The word beauty itself is a word that I learned to use in Italy, because in Argentina it was something you weren't allowed to say. You weren't allowed to say something is beautiful. In Italy, I learned to search for beauty and not to be ashamed of searching for beauty, because in the end, beauty is like a great trial that you have to put at the end of making an object. In the sense, if an object, once you've made it, doesn't convey this beauty that you've searched for, you have made some mistake during the process. So, okay, this was my project, but as usual, one thing leads to the next, and so on. Again, I was searching for an idea which characterized the project. I never start from the shape, I always start from the idea. The shape I find a bit by chance following the idea. So here, the point was to make magazine holder. I started working with Danese. I also had an opportunity with Driade, which is also a company which in the 90s was working very well. So a huge opportunity for me. So they wanted to make a magazine holder. My idea was magazines are already so beautiful in themselves, and the magazine holders tend to hide this beauty. So all this work that the graphic designers put in making the covers disappears when you put them all together in a magazine holder. So my idea was to show this beauty, let's say. So the first concept was, if I take a sheet of paper with one hand, it folds. If I hold it like this, it keeps in position. So I had this idea. Again, there's an intuition that you need. Sometimes a lamp turns on and you suddenly have the idea. I thought if I make a series of cones and I make a vertical section, the first one is going to be more flat, and then gradually they're going to be more and more cone-shaped. And so you can imagine that if I put one magazine, it would have started flat, but then when you push it in, it's slightly folded and it stays in position. Again, when you tell these ideas, there's lots of people who are going to say, no, it doesn't work because it hasn't been done before. Anytime you make something that hasn't been done before, you'll always find, unless you're luckier than I am, no, actually, we haven't ever done it, it's never been done, it doesn't work. So I made my own prototype here, and I was able to explain better and show that it worked. So it's a silly idea apparently, but actually you put the magazines in and they fit one over the other, and it looks like a flower almost with its petals, and all the magazines show, and so you show off all the beauty of the graphic layout of the magazines. Then each detail is important, and you need time and energy to dedicate to it, and then of course the object needs to be prototyped and industrialized. So each time you draw a line, you've got to think, how's it actually going to be produced? This is why I said it's an holistic process, because I enter a lot into the detail of a project. So here, for example, these modules, they go one over the other, then we have 3 metal legs, and this was the project. This was the first prototype, let's say, that I made. This is the magazine holder once it's been produced. And I remember that it had been presented together with Philip Stark, so there was a presentation for me at the time to be together with Philip Stark. It was amazing. So again, trying to work on a project history, on a project story, one thing leads to the next. And so, after working with Danese, I received a phone call from Gismondi, who is the owner of Artemide. So, such an important person in the world of Italian design. He's been part of important companies, he's founded important companies, so a huge character in the world of Italian design, even though now he's quite old. He called me and said, they told me that you can solve me this problem. And I said, wow, what is it? And he said, we have this mechanism, and we want to make a table lamp with this mechanism. A table lamp which use lamp bulbs in a certain way, so the whole technical description. I said, okay, let's try. I started working, but the mechanism didn't work actually. And again, here starts my curiosity. I'm so fascinated by robots, as probably many of you are, and their logics within a robot and its movements that are hugely interesting. And from there, I found this little idea, which I used in the project, which was to, let's see if I can explain, because it's not so easy. All table lamps normally use a parallel, which is used to have a constant tension in the movement of the head of the lamp. So when you move around the lamp, there are moments in which you can be very close to the lamp itself and places that are further, so it's not the same. You have a tension that needs to be constant when you need to make a balance. To balance these weights, this element is hugely important, this parallelogram. My intuition was to change this element and put a belt, a little belt, like a conveyor belt, like robots use. This prototype was made with kind of Lego constructions to see if it worked. And it seemed to work. Then this particular element and intuition that I had was developed, and this turned into the key of the project and made it also a different and unusual project. So this conveyor belt, which went all the way along the first arm, let's say, of the lamp, and reached and it arrived right here and balanced, kept in balance all the way to keep this head of the lamp in the space balanced compared to the central body of the lamp. So in the end, I had a movement which is similar almost a robot-like, you know, like humanoid. So it was a bit poetic as well. Look at this movement, unusual. I worked on it for a whole year and dedicated huge energy to this because it was such an important opportunity to make a table lamp for Artemide. If it works, of course, it's also an economic opportunity, very interesting. But it was a failure for me. But the failure always helps to learn. Why was it a failure, actually? The project was presented in Salone del Mobile, it was put in the catalogue, but it was never produced, actually. But this taught me a lot. It was never produced because the brief was very clear. I had to use a 150 watt light bulb. This was a historical moment, important, and it was the moment when LED lamps were being introduced. And so I knew that this was a historical moment, and I said, why don't we try to use LED lamp bulbs here? So all the dimension of this body and the complexity would have been also lighter and also less expensive to produce. So to invest all the money in this lamp for a very short moment in the market for light bulbs, because and so they didn't make it, and I found this very interesting, and I learned something from here. And I learned that if I'm not 100% persuaded of what I'm doing, I shouldn't pursue it. Okay, Gismondi told me I should use traditional light bulbs, and so I followed them, but actually I should have insisted more on the LED. Even risking to lose a client, you must try and share your ideas, but be persuaded of what they're saying. If you're not persuaded of what they're asking, what I do is I try to find a different solution, something which makes us agree. And this is what happened with this other project, which I'll tell you about as well. This project is called Hope. It's the first project which I did for Luceplan. And from here, a very long, important relationship was born. I still work for them. I still create projects that have given us both a huge satisfaction. After having had that bad experience with Artemide, Luceplan offered me to work for them, and I said, okay. The brief was quite hard because I wanted to make a chandelier, which is a project, a kind of a light fixture, which is very particular. It's very strongly characterized because it's going to be very decorative. And Luceplan themselves as a company, and me also, are not particularly, don't have this great decorative story behind them. Yes, they're very poetic, very beautiful objects, but they tend to have things through clever details and logical details, technical details, which generate the poetic, not in a very decorative way. So, in fact, for 20 years they tried to create a chandelier, actually, and they never managed. So Alessandro Salfatti, who at that moment was the CEO of Luceplan, asked me to try, and I tried. And again, my curiosity led me. 5 years earlier of that moment, in Paola's home, somebody we both know, I don't know, a party, maybe Filipino was there as well, and there was inflatable cushion, incredibly kitsch, made in PVC, with printed material, which was printed PVC. I took this cushion. It looked as if it was crystal, actually. It was amazing. Probably everybody else was drinking, and I was analyzing this inflatable PVC cushion. And it was so light, and it looked like a crystal ball, actually. It was ugly, but very amazing. And so there, once I went home, I started searching what it was, and I realized there was some sort of lens within it, and I tried to understand how this works, and you wonder, why are you studying this? This lens is a decomposition of a spherical lens. So the top one is a spherical lens, classic. It's got to be sectioned horizontally, compared to the axe, and then they project this plan, this element, on the plan. So you see that this part here, which is curved here, becomes this one. Okay, so it's kind of a fragmented curve, let's say. So the optic abilities, capacities of this lens are the same as the curved lens, only there's not all this material underneath it. So this is from a curiosity. There was immediately the possibility of conveying this onto a project. So when I start to understand what a chandelier was, the chandelier in itself is a kind of lamp which should make a happy, festive history, light, and a history is characterized by the use of crystal, normally Venetian or Bohemian crystal, to try and distribute light in space as much as possible. So you have these candles, and the candles' light was multiplied in all the reflections on the crystal. So the combination of these two elements, and from there we have the first ideas for this lamp. So I thought, but maybe there's a possibility of finding a very deep logic and to put these things together. Immediately then, I don't lose time, I start sketching, I start finding an idea that allows me to interrogate what I'm doing. When you have an idea, immediately try it out, because even if you make mistakes or draw it badly or it doesn't look nice to begin with, that's not the point. That's not the moment when I'm defining the beauty of the project, but it's to see if something's happening, if from my first sketch I can ask myself a series of questions about what I'm doing. So the first idea was to make a module, a very highly technological module, with these particular lens printed, put in this way. So very industrial element through plastic mold injections. And the metallic body inside would vary its dimensions to change the light effect. So the module would be attached to the lamp, laser cut. Everything I'd learned from my previous experiences of laser cut was used here. And this was the first main intuition, let's say. So that I could cover the light source in space with many of these lenses to create hundreds of reflections. This was my initial concept. I went to the company with a tiny prototype, and again, the advantage of certain very clever Italian companies is that they are able to dialogue with, you can talk directly to the owner. In other parts of the world, very difficult to speak with the owner or the actual leader of the company. You will speak to marketing or other things. Whereas here, you can speak directly to the owner. And I said, I think we can do a fantastic lamp by using these lenses. And he said, well, let's try. Why not? See what happens. And this is how we went on. To cover the light bulb in all possible directions was very hard, of course. So I tried to find the logic, for example, in a football ball, soccer ball, you know, very hard parts. They didn't really reflect, they're not really right with the structure. But then I was interested in these monocell organisms which have logics within their structures which are very interesting. These are some amazing 1800s drawings in which you can see these amazing logics of these organisms. And from here I had the idea of volumetric forms of shapes through a series of layers. That was huge inspiration for my project. So here, let me see. I'll go on to the technical details. This inside structure is very simple. Through 4 folds, I am able to position these plans in space very precisely, highly precisely. Everything was managed from a 3D computer project system to see if I could cover the light bulbs in all their parts, actually. And then that plastic module had a very simple detail of connecting with the main structure. Again, here, there's a very deep conversation and sharing of ideas with the company. And on this point, we really worked for months because they wanted to be sure that the position of the module was absolutely perfect in space. And the technical office was proposing 2 screws, and I was saying, no, I think it should be with connection. And they were saying, you're crazy, you need screws, it's the only way to keep it still. And you said, what you want to do with this, just hook. But sometimes you have a feeling, and if you have the possibility of experiment them, if you don't experiment them, there'll always be only hypotheses. Instead, I tried in my studio to make the prototype, asking a friend to do the laser cut part for me, and in the end I saw that the system worked. So it was really like having a little hook, like when you hook a coat hanger or something. These were the folded elements. This was in 2008. And after a year and a half of work, I must tell you a bit about, 2008, great world economic crisis. The company, as all Italian companies, was going through some difficulty. They decided in that year to produce just this object and take it to the Salone because they really believed strongly in it. They worked very hard on it. On one Friday, they present this prototype to me. They had to launch everything to reach the Salone. So this was made with just one single module, printed, inject printed. So the production logics, which I will go into now, made sure that each of these lenses could not be bigger than this module. So 7 centimeters more or less of diameter. So just following this technical problem, we had accepted the fact that we were going to repeat this lens many times in one module. But they said to me, okay, take it, have a look at it, and on Monday we're going to launch the production. Everybody was quite happy. And I had this in my mind, this already happened once, that you can't accept something that you don't believe in. This is not what I had in my mind, the light object made of nothing that looked like crystal. This was not like a butterfly's wing. This was huge and bulky. So in that weekend, my first project with Luceplan, the mold cost 250,000 euros. It was the only project they were going to present in Salone. The stress I was under was amazing. So I didn't sleep the whole weekend because I had to try and do it differently. So I went back to my previous idea, the essence of my concept, and I completely changed the technology. And so again, what was useful here was the fact of being able to have very wide knowledges, very different skills, because injection printing didn't work. It was a very strong aesthetic limit. So I went to a different production technique, which is the one which is used for records, for vinyl records, old records. You have these huge molds where you print them, and then you make a silk part, which is then used as a kind of counter mold. You pour the molded plastic on top of that and you press. And in this way, you're able to have very, very precise shape. Let's go more into detail. To be able to make these kind of extremely precise shapes and very small, you've got to have a metal which is not too hard, otherwise you can't manage. So this technique, which kind of does a copy of soft metal, and you transform into print what is softer, let's say. This allowed me to make some much bigger lens with this technique. And so I worked on it, and this, which worked, helped me to debate again what I'd done. And this made me understand that actually I'd made several mistakes. Aesthetically, I'd completely gone off track. Each of those modules was completely impossible to transport. I wanted a very light lamp that you could buy in the shop and take back home. And the packaging instead was becoming huge, something that was changing too much the essence of the project. Whereas if each one of these modules, if it was just one piece, you can't transport it, you can't disconnect it and disassemble it. Whereas now the idea was to make these shapes, which is the Fresnel lens made with the technique that I told you of vinyl discs. Then they're cut, and with the central body, you connect them onto the central body with this little hook that I've showed you, and they hook on in the injected plastic mold. So I said, okay, stop everything. I made this prototype in my studio, and this is another digression I've got to make. A few years before, I had a fixation of having a numeric control machine in my studio, and people were saying, you're crazy, aren't you going to be a prototypist? What's the point of you to have this? But I said, actually, if I had this kind of tool, it would be so useful for me, and I bought it, and I had it in studio. I don't know whether it would have ever been useful, but actually, in that weekend, it was vital for me to make that prototype. And I went to the company on the Monday and said, this is a huge mistake we're making. I'm going to propose you something different. This is how we're going to do it. I went to the Città del Sole, which is a toy shop, which had the standard Fresnel lens. I bought them, and I cut them with numeric control machine, and I made this little mold, and this little hook which connected them all in space, and this started to look more like what I wanted to begin with. Then we made a specific lens specifically produced for this product. What happened here? Let's stop a moment. The company said, okay, they stopped the work of the technical office for 1 year, and they accepted my idea, and that was an amazing act of flexibility to tell you the whole structure. We made a huge mistake. Okay, we're not to have a new project for Salone, it doesn't matter, but we've got to follow this new path. And we found a company in Germany who made the lens made to measure for us. They made lens for Zeiss, an amazing company. And this lens was designed specifically for this project by me together with the optician, because, again, with the ability, the idea of this lens is that it reduces the light point 5 times so that it doesn't really reflect so strongly. It reflects more what is around it than the actual light, so it doesn't flash you, let's say. And at the same time, you need to have a different dimension that will go beyond this circle. So again, we had to put many lenses together. And I instead had this idea of making an elliptical lens. So if you see, the reduction here is not the same as the one here. And the technical office spoke to the optical expert, and he reasoned differently and said, this is crazy, you did do it. For him, optics has got to be perfect. He thinks of normal optical lenses, but we're not interested in that. So I took this risk and decided to make this lens, which arrived 1 week before the Salone. This was the first time I saw the lens. It was one piece with an elliptical lens put onto the original part, and it was wonderful. And then I studied the packaging, the instructions to assemble it. And this is a final lamp, which then became a whole system, actually. And here I want to say this as I strongly believe in the essence of things. We really went to search for the essence of a chandelier and to find within the logic of this object, what is it that makes it a chandelier, what makes it a beautiful object. And this was the essence that was applied then to the logic of a new product. There's not a shape. I didn't redesign the shape of the original chandelier. There's not a formal reference. There's not something that looks like a chandelier. What reflects a chandelier is the essence. This is a modern object with the essence of a chandelier. And in fact, it looks perfect even in an old environment which was one of the original chandelier, even if the shape's different, but the essence is right. This project gave us huge satisfaction. We won Red Dot, Compasso d'Oro. It became a bestseller for the company, actually. This allows you gradually to make other reasonings and reflections, to adapt to that vision that maybe at the beginning was just focused on what am I doing. You start opening a bit the bush so that you see a bit of the scenery around you, so that the tree doesn't hide the whole panorama. And when you start looking around the tree and not just as the object, it becomes important also to start offering other stuff to the companies, so you can start proposing your own ideas and see what does the world need. And this is even more interesting when that deepness in the detail, then it must be put together with a 360 degrees vision of the world. So from there, I decided to work a lot with LED lights, because at that moment, this was the future of lighting in the industry. And it's our present at the moment now. And what I saw was that the LED lamp gave them a unique opportunity to design, to me as a designer, to discover American again, let's say, because you reach a new world and explore it. Nobody's done anything yet before. You can do whatever you like. It's a new country which has not been very much explored yet, and you can create new stories. This is what I'm really interested in, to be able to make small steps to expand the boundaries of what I know. This is where I find myself most at ease. So when you find a new technology which is so revolutionary, this can really become the beginning for your own personal discoveries. And so I started working on different projects. The first project was called Synapse, which kind of puts together the possibility of the LED, of all the research which I made in my path, LED lights, which the difference with traditional lights is that it's very small. Then they group them and put them together, but the LED in itself is a tiny element. So this idea of expanding this point in space, I thought, was its main value. So I thought that this, put together with the idea of understanding the world and people, for example, in this project in particular, our way of living has also changed, our lifestyle has changed, homes are smaller, we don't have the huge rooms, or we don't have a separate kitchen from the living room, because often people either don't cook a lot or this home is small and you have one area together. But you always need layers within a home to kind of somehow divide these spaces. So again, there was a possibility of mixing the idea of LED in space and using it for dividing space as well. And this is how I carried out this project. The idea seemed very simple at the beginning, but actually it wasn't so simple in the end, but this is it. It was kind of a single module in a kind of triangular shape, which had LEDs within it, which is connected with a shape, exactly the same shape, but overturned, turned upside down in this way. And this was the basic module, which allows you to manage the light that you generate within and is projected and reflected in the environment in different ways, in different directions. This module was then connected to others and could generate a whole, let's say, knit, a whole weave to divide spaces. This detail here was the key to the project. How to connect the modules was really the hardest part. Each connection of the module should be mechanic, but also electronic and electric in 9 millimeters of width, because this triangular shape, to be able to diffuse the light in space should be very flat, because otherwise the light would have stayed inside it. So to do this, I had to have quite a thin layer actually. At that moment, Luceplan was bought by an international company, which was Philips. And I said, fantastic, this is a perfect moment for working synergetically with other people. And we went to them and we explained our problem to connect these modules in space, and we explained the whole thing of how they were supposed to be repeated hundreds of times, and we had to have electricity and electronic signals. And Philips said, this is going to be impossible, forget about it. Actually, it's not impossible, because we managed in a very simple, actually silly way. A bit how you cut a salami in Italy, that you cut it a bit inclined, you never cut it straight. When you cut it inclined, when you cut this width diagonally, you have 25 millimeters instead of 9, and there I was able to make a super simple connection. I think I'll find it if we go on. And this was how it worked. These were all the prototypes that I made in my studio. This is the hook, the connection. In this dimension, it was very simple to solve this problem. And without going crazy, and without just keeping inside a little flat electronic element to convey the electric signal as well. I'm going quite fast here, but each of these projects is probably 1.5 or 2 years of work. The most exaggerated thing I did, possibly the most, extreme, was to search for a formal Friedman, to find a technology and try to change its shape. This project is called Nothing. The concept was exactly to erase what had been done up till now and start to make a light bulb, a light fixture as if nobody ever made it. I kept thinking, my reflection was that I saw many light fixtures being designed at that time, but they always had within them solutions that had happened before. So basically they were traditional lamps with the LED light inside instead of the traditional light bulb, which I thought we could invent a new language for LED lights, because the rules were changing. The rules of light fixtures were changing. So, as a LED is an electronic element actually, and it's born as an electronic circuit, I suddenly thought that I could make a printed circuit, cut it in a certain way, and take it and make it flatter and generate a lamp just with the minimum necessary, so only what allows a LED to be a LED, let's say, using the minimal element. This project almost drove me crazy, actually, now I'm going to tell you why. So my idea was to take this circuit, cut it, and then iron it, really flatten it somehow, so pulling it, so that these elements, instead of being all together, they'd be expanded in space and generate a light which would expand in different directions. Differently from other projects, I couldn't design the final shape, because the final shape, which normally you start sketching when you're imagining it, you start thinking what it's going to look like. In this case, as it was a shape that started from something else, I had to design the first cut, the first part. And then when you expanded it, it would have changed completely what it would look like. I imagined something, depending on the dimensions of the cut, it could be in any different way. This is why I became crazy. I made 130 prototypes for this, trying to reach something which could be all right. I'm not saying by just a random number. I really made 130 prototypes. Yes, and I showed them all as well. because think that I just designed my cuts and the cuts made a shape. It's as if you're designing the DNA of something. If the shape was generated by something else, the cut generated a shape. At the end of my crazy process, I could already start understanding what kind of cut would generate that shape. So I knew that if I changed a few millimeters in a cut, this would completely affect the final shape. It was a very interesting project. And in the end, my intention was to reduce to the minimum possible element so that we would really enhance the light. That's why I call the project Nothing, because it started from this structure that you can see here, and then you pulled it up and kept it in place by this tablet, this tripod, very light tripod. This is a detail of the LEDs projecting light against the wall. I created this sort of shadows where I didn't see the light, and the light was reflected by the space, let's say, by the wall itself. So really reducing to the minimum what you could do with a lighting fixture. Then I did an exhibition with this, actually. This is a structure made with 130 new prototypes and laser cut tubes. I'll tell you the story about the two lamps. One is this, which I presented last year, which is called Niche. It also won some awards this year. Again, following all the concepts I've told you before, which has always been my research project. Has always been my research process has not really have a conclusion. My idea, even in the one I told you first, was to take the light source and distribute it in space and give to each point in space its own intelligence, because I imagined that there could be the possibility that if I could somehow create all these light points in space to manage the direction of light, I could possibly generate the first lamp which had a way of generating light completely innovative in every possible aspect, because every lamp creates the same kind of light, let's say. Once you've created it, the light goes in a certain direction, has a certain effect, always. You can't change it when you use it. Whereas I imagined that if I could position the LEDs in space with the logics that were similar to the ones that are in nature, similar to Fibonacci shapes, in the Fibonacci figures, I could give intelligence to each of these points, and I could turn them on and off independently from one from the other. To do this, I certainly needed my previous experiences in electricity and electronics, and I found this company which I think allowed me to create this structure, sorry. This is a series of cables, positive and negative cables. You put together a positive and a negative, and they keep the light point in space, and when they're both on, the light turns on. In another direction, you turn another point on. So they connect the points. I could have made it also dumb LEDs, so not complicated, with no electronics in it, with a low cost. And the only clever intelligence managing it all is the one managing the poles, let's say, the positive and negative cables, to decide which of the points are turning on. Again, I made a prototype. Let's see if I can show you this video. I made a prototype made with clay, made with a very clever boy who helped me. And through the computer, we started managing which modules would turn on in different moments. And this is how this lamp was born, that I can manage how I illuminate my space in any possible way. Depending on how I'm living my space at that moment, I can decide how to put the light. So imagine you're having a dinner, you're having a meal, and you don't want direct light on your table because I'm waiting for people to come at table and I want to diffuse light towards the ceiling. Then maybe we start eating and so I need to project light onto the table. Or then maybe we go and watch a film, a movie, because the sofa is close by. I don't want the light against the TV because it's annoying when you watch the screen. So I can decide to illuminate only the side which is far from the TV, let's say, and so have shadows towards me. So in the end, this was the result. The last project I'm showing you about lights, I promise, but these have all happened thanks to LEDs. None of these projects was possible without the LED lights. This is why I like to work on a boundary, to make a new step in something that has never been done. This lamp here also here I use things that had attracted my curiosity early on, which are Peltier cells, the ones that you use to make it simple. If you look at little fridges that you have in cars, for example, that you connect to the electricity of a car if you want to chill some drinks, they use this Peltier cell with an electric connection. One side becomes cold and one side becomes hot. Of course, use the cold one for the fridge, and the other one needs to be fanned. If I use these cells with hot and cold areas, I can generate electricity. And I wanted to create a lamp through this, thanks to LEDs that have very low consumption, hundreds of times below traditional light bulb. And so we managed to make this lamp, which with a tiny flame, made with ethanol, organic ethanol, heats the two faces of the cell. These two faces convey the heat to the cell. The bottom part is in contact with this area, which reaches 100 degrees and produces a certain quantity of energy, which is necessary to turn the LEDs on or to even charge a battery, for example, for a mobile phone. This lamp has a very precise market indication because it's very useful for restaurants. It's very strongly connected to the northern countries, northern cultures in which light and fire are a very important element in evenings, in conviviality. So this lamp generates the right kind of light and at the same time has this little flame which makes it interesting. And it's enough energy to light a table and to charge a mobile phone. This again is a prototype that I made myself in the studio. And it's fun to have clients, of course, when you present this, they say, first of all, he's not completely crazy, obviously, and maybe he can actually produce something interesting from here. And it worked. My prototype that I made by hand, but it practically worked. Let me just say this last thing because it's very important, and then you can say, this is what I just want to say something at the moment. So, if you go on asking yourself questions and trying to open up your mind in your questions, the hardest question that I've always asked myself is, what can I do in this world? What am I doing in this world as a designer? What's my contribution? Because the first drive that you have is to do, of course, to create because you like it. Like when I was a kid and I worked on my little toy car. But this strong drive changed my whole world because my life, because I like to find new things, I like to work on things. I didn't really have an answer which would answer all my desire. I felt, okay, I do it because I like doing it, but what's the reason really? Until I read Steve Jobs' biography and I found what I think is a perfect or most accurate description of this, which basically says something like, in the end, creative people, or people who do make things, try to make things, in the end have understood that the world does not belong to us. We live in a world in which we have not created, and my clothes, somebody else invented hundreds of years ago. What I eat, what I drink, the microphone I'm using, everything has been created by tiny creative acts of thousands of people of my same species in history. When you realize that you belong to the human species, which allows you to be what you are today, you feel the responsibility that maybe with your own personal ability or within your ability, your desire, you can make that tiny step forward to bring to your species something new, something extra. It may sound a bit utopistic or strong, but it's like a tool to measure very interestingly. It's a very clever tool, actually. And it allows, sometimes it also justifies all the nights I haven't slept, and also my extreme ideas. I'm always trying to find new steps and new ideas that can be useful for others. Certain projects, of course, give you even more satisfaction when this step is stronger for other people. Do we have 5 or 10 minutes still? Yes, I think. The projects, okay, are the ones that are strongest. I just want to show you one other thing. But Filippini wanted to make a small digression a moment. I wanted to say that you've seen many lights, because even though Francisco doesn't just do lights, his career at a certain point, for reasons that were quite clear, I think, has taken that direction. Companies were more and more asking him to be a lighting designer, because Francisco, let's mention also Daniele Ribacche, I don't know whether this is the right pronunciation, has been and is still one of the strongest designers for Luceplan, but in general for the world of lighting design research. Together you went to New York a month ago to speak about this, I think. So really his contribution to this field, which is so passionate, as you've seen, on the theme of light, really comes from certainly a deep knowledge of technologies that you've seen, but also from an amazing operation, almost obsessive, but in a positive way, of researching. I think in technical offices you probably loved and hated, more hated probably than loved. Some people love me very much, but I'm much hated by others as well. The fact that I dedicated the latest years to light, in a way, was by chance, actually, but follows what I was saying first, the fact that it's a field in which there's been a new element like LED, which allows you to rethink things from a new point of view. This certainly is something which triggers my way of working and gives me huge satisfaction. And this is maybe why I can make the difference in something. This is by chance, in a way. I didn't start as a light designer, it's not my field, it's not where I studied, but I started doing completely different stuff. But what really drove me here is what I told you first, the fact that I find a justification in my work if I manage to create something new, to make really a new little step. Okay, sometimes this can be the first lamp that illuminates in a different way, or with which you connect to internet. Or it can be sometimes also the solar vault, which I'd like to tell you about now. So I wasn't born as a lighting designer. I like to design anything really. But some years ago, Alberto Meda came to me with this idea to create a project to give clean water to difficult areas of the world in which it's hard to have clean water. And so we found this system called SODIS, which basically existed, we didn't invent it, but with a PET bottle, if you put it in the sun for 3 hours, the UVA rays in the PET, which they manage to kill some of the germs of the water, 99% of the water germs. So it's like boiling the water. So without using any electric energy to boil the water, I can purify this water using just the sun, the solar energy. So we created this bottle, which was made specifically for this reason. Basically, it has two faces, a metal one and a normal one. So that one of them reflected the light. It's a very thin bottle. It holds 4 liters. It doesn't look, but it's quite big. When you put it under the sun, it can purify water of all the germs. We studied the handle so that you can turn it around and use it as a hook to travel, but also as a base to orient it towards the sun. We were awarded with one of the biggest awards for technologies which improve the world. And with this money, we put ourselves into the difficult business of producing this object, with 10,000 difficulties that I won't tell you about right now. But I've given you a story of my life of really skipping around. I've certainly left out some elements and some parts of my life, but I think it's clear what I wanted to say. If I can say something, I think you are extremely lucky, because you're probably in the best moment for the history of humanity for creative people. You have the possibility of having access to knowledge and information that's never been so easy to access. If you want to do something, you can find it quickly on the internet. I use it constantly because I spend a lot of time also learning things through internet, and that was impossible in the past. First, you had to transfer to Milan like I did, or go to exhibitions, go to places. Now, from any part of the world, you can study anything and know about everything. And you have an ability to create, to make, which is unique now. So first, to make something, you had to know someone who produced it for it. Now you can produce things yourself. If you have a laser cut, a numeric control machine, or you have an amazing world available here, hugely interesting, which if you're curious and you're passionate about what you do and you're a bit determined, you can really do lots of things. I really wish you all the best, and I hope you have wonderful careers ahead of you and help by doing well this job. Has anybody got questions before you all go? Do you have any questions? As usual, if anybody has questions, he is happy to answer if there are any. Even about the profession, about how you can be a designer between Argentina and Milan. Nobody is curious here. Somebody, yes, we have one raised hand. And then he has a quick question as well. It's a good question. I've worked very hard to do towards this. First of all, the first thing that you've got to design is your own life, I think. So I had very clear in my mind that I wanted to be free to live wherever I wanted. So I worked hard these years. Of course, I've been also lucky, and certain things have helped me to be here. If I am able to have relations with companies that are not just in Italy and other parts of the world, I have worked with a very interesting laboratory in Argentina, which is very helpful for all my prototyping, for example, and I like buying stuff, so I can prototype anything with my laboratory there, for example. This is like a temple for me, sacred temple where nobody can disturb me and I can work. And then I come to Milan, I do other stuff, I'm with my customers, I go to exhibitions, and I do things that are interesting and enrich my professional baggage and my day and my mind and keep you updated with the world, not just in Milan. I go around Europe and other places, go to exhibitions and so on. Things that are really then the starting point for your projects. I hope this was the answer to your question. Thank you. I also was always shy as a student and didn't ask, but you can. I don't care. I don't give a toss, he said. This is a good question, of course, but nowadays there's a very big energy and this idea that you've got to be a star to be a designer and you've got to advertise yourself and show off. I prefer to talk about what I do and not about myself. So I've always been quite shy and not really interested in all this showbiz logic. Yes, of course, I join into exhibitions, but that's to show how I work, hoping to involve people in my personal story about how I work. So you've got to present your work, telling more about what you want to do and how your work is going to be rather than who you are. This is more about what you want to tell, your story. I think you should work more about this. I'm curious that you asked me this because a lot of people work a lot on this side of advertising themselves. Maybe they're right, I don't know. This is really not part of how I am. I've always been not very good at self-advertising. I can even let 2 weeks go by before I answer an email, for example, which maybe is not so good. I'm going to tell you this story. The first thing I did, I went to Salone Satellite, the part of the Salone for young students. I joined some competitions and I won some awards. And that in Salone Satellite really helped me to be visible to begin with. But as I told you, with a story, telling a story of my object, it's got to be consistent with what you want to do and what you want to present. It's hard, it's full of designers, so you've got to work on what you want to say. There are lots of possibilities. Competitions are certainly a great tool. If you've got something to say today, now maybe blogs are not so used anymore, but there are lots of ways in which you can show what you are doing if you have contents to show. For me it was awards and Salone Satellite. I was lucky enough to win some awards and Salone Satellite gave me great visibility, yes. That was first opportunity. Good evening. I want to reconnect to the first question that was asked by another student. So you make the prototyping all in Argentina or do you sell in Milan as well? Up till 2 years ago, I lived in Milan the whole time. It's only since a couple of years that I lived almost half and half, let's say. So I don't have the studio in Milan anymore. I have everything in Argentina, so all my work now is carried out there. want to add something that you work practically completely by yourself. I find this interesting. Explain very quickly, really. You've learned possibly something from some of your masters, actually, in this respect. Yes, this sometimes seems a bit strange because people ask you, how many people do you have in your studio? And I say, now I have one cooperator because I enjoy working and I'm not interested in organizing a big studio, so I really like to be there myself and working with my hands directly. So I dedicate this time, which for me is basic, because I can tell you why actually. I think that when you create your own project and you develop it, you're actually having ideas for other projects. Instead, if you give the first idea and somebody carries out your project and develops it, you're losing something. If I put the idea there and somebody else develops it for me, I didn't go on, let's say, feeding on that idea. Even if, whether it's somebody in your studio or somebody in the company, instead, if you can do the whole path of developing the idea, actually you are enriched through the project itself. You haven't just thrown an idea there. You have 10 more ideas from the development of the first one. So this is the first reason, which is really interesting. Second, I must say that this lesson was also something I learned from people I worked with at the beginning, that lots of studios of this kind, characters that I work with like Vico Magistretti, have always had very few cooperators, one or two at the most, for this pleasure of doing things hands-on actually. Enough? Do we have more? Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions?